Hey guys, tonight you find yourself standing before the low stone gate of a medieval town as dusk folds itself over the fields, with cold mist rising from the river and settling in the seams of your cloak. Your boots are heavy with mud, your fingers are stiff around the strap of your satchel, and somewhere beyond the wall a horse blows pale breath into the winter air. Smoke hangs under the rafters of the gatehouse. Damp straw clings to the stones, and the last bell of evening rolls from a church tower like something old and tired turning in its sleep. A torch spits resin above you, making the guards' helmets glow in uneasy patches. Medieval travel brochures really oversold this experience, assuming medieval travel brochures were mostly mud hunger and someone shouting about turnip prices. And gently you probably would not last a week out here, not without better shoes, a stronger stomach, and a deep personal relationship with boiled grain. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as the gate creaks open, leave a quiet comment telling me where you are listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pass beneath the arch as the guards lower their spears just enough to look official, and not enough to truly inconvenience anyone. The stones above you are dark with age and soot, and the passage smells of wet wool, old leather, horse dung, and the faint comforting promise of supper somewhere ahead. Behind you the road sinks into evening, a pale strip between winter hedges. Before you the town narrows into lanes so cramped that the upper floors lean toward each other like gossiping neighbours who have waited all day for something worth repeating. The bell sounds again, smaller now inside the walls. You feel it in your ribs before you quite hear it, that deep bronze note marking the hour for people who own no clocks and trust heaven habit, and the monastery tower to keep the world from drifting loose. A woman with a fur-lined hood hurries past carrying a basket of rushes for a floor that will smell a little sweeter by morning. A boy not young enough to be a child in the soft modern sense but old enough to be tired drags a bundle of firewood along the gutter. A dog with one torn ear watches you from beneath a cart, decides you are probably harmless, and begins following at a distance with the solemn confidence of an unpaid guide. You trudge deeper into the town and the first true warmth of it reaches you. Not gentle warmth exactly, but the crowded heat of bodies, animals, hearths, ovens, and too many people living inside walls meant to keep danger out and smells in. Smoke crawls from roof holes. Candles glow behind oiled linen windows. A shutter bangs. Somewhere a woman laughs, then coughs, then laughs again, as though the cough has paid rent and may as well stay. You are hungry now in the way this world teaches hunger slowly from the bones outward. The day has given you thin ale, a heel of coarse bread, and a spoonful of pottage so shy of meat that it may once have heard of a chicken from across a field. Still the town promises food. You smell onions softening in fat smoked fish, warming near coals, and beneath it all the heavy earth-sweet scent of bread. Bread is everywhere here, even when it is not visible. It is held under arms in cloth stacked on boards, traded for farthings dipped into ale, used as a trencher beneath stew. Blessed, cursed, hoarded, dropped, stolen, forgiven. It is the quiet wheel around which the day turns. A good loaf means the body may sleep. A bad loaf means murmuring at doorways, sharp looks in the market, and the sort of trouble that begins in whispers, because it is still deciding whether to become law. You hear the first whisper near the corner where a shrine to Saint Honoré, patron of bakers, stands tucked into the wall under a little roof of warped wood. Someone has left a candle there, though it gutters badly in the draught, its beeswax running down like pale tears. Beside it sits a twist of dried rosemary, because some swear rosemary keeps away ill luck from oven's sour tempers and neighbours who borrow pans and return them dented. No one can quite agree whether the saint listens better to bakers or to those cheated by bakers, which seems a delicate matter tonight. Shortweight mutters a man in a patched cap close enough for you to catch it as you pass. His companion, a narrow woman with red hands and a basket pressed against her hip, sniffs. Shortweight and black at the bottom. My tooth near cracked on a stone in it. Could be mill grit, the man says. Could be the devil learning to bake, she answers. It is said softly, not as a scream or accusation, but as one more thread in the town's woolen tangle of complaint. You slow, pretending to adjust your satchel while the dog sits beside your boot, as if you have arranged this stop for his benefit. The two townsfolk move on their shoulders, hunched against the damp, and the words they leave behind seem to hang in the mist, short weight black bottom stone in the bread. Ahead the lane widens briefly where 3 roads meet around a public well. Women draw water in wooden buckets, their sleeves tied back, their faces shining in torchlight. A carter curses softly over a broken wheel, not loudly enough to offend heaven, but clearly enough to inform it of his disappointment. Near him an ink-stained clerk lifts the hem of his robe, away from the mud, with the careful dignity of a man who owns only one decent garment, and suspects the street has a grudge against it. You pause by the well, the stones are slick. Someone has hung a charm of rowan twigs from the post bound with red thread to keep sickness from the water, or so an old woman tells a younger one. Even now it is hard to tell whether such charms comfort the water the drinker, or merely the mind that must drink and hope. The bucket rises with a wooden groan, and the water smells of iron rope and cold earth. Then the bread smell strengthens. It comes from the left down a lane where soot darkens the plaster walls and a red glow leaks from the half-open shutters of a bakehouse. You do not go there yet. Not fully. You only turn your head as anyone hungry would and see flour dust floating in the light like dull winter stars. A man in a leather apron appears briefly in the doorway, broad-shouldered sleeves, rolled hair damp at the temples. He lifts a tray with both hands. Behind him the oven mouth burns orange, a small household sun built of brick ash and obligation. Across the lane 2 women stand beneath an overhang, sharing the shelter, and not the same opinion. One cradles a loaf against her chest as though it has personally betrayed her. The other pokes at its crust with a finger. Too hollow, says the first. Too dear, says the second. Too pale at the side, too proud at the price. They glance toward the bakehouse, then lower their voices. You catch only pieces. Yesterday's loaves, the assize, the market scale, the baker's wife seen buying poor rye, someone's cousin who found chaff enough in his bread to thatch a mouse's cottage, which is perhaps an exaggeration, though in this town exaggeration appears to be a recognized craft. You move on because the guards have closed the gate behind you. The evening deepens, and standing too long near other people's quarrels is a reliable way to be offered a part in them. The dog follows toenails clicking on stone. Rain begins in thin strokes, touching your hood and darkening the lane. From an upper window a candle is placed behind horn panes, making the room beyond glow amber and soft. Somewhere inside, a family settles around a board pottage in a shared bowl ale. In a jug, perhaps a strip of smoked fish, if fortune has been feeling unusually generous. You imagine the bread there set in the middle waiting for hands. Bread should be ordinary. That is its power. It should not make people suspicious. It should not need defending. It should arrive like morning, like bells, like the first steam from a pot. Yet tonight, in this walled town with its damp rushes, iron keys, oak doors, and watchfires beginning to burn along the parapet, bread has become a thing people look at twice. The church bell gives one last slow note. The sound rolls over roofs, over the bakehouse chimney, over the shrine, with its failing candle over the broken cartwheel, and the muttering well. You pull your cloak closer and step toward the glow of the inn sign ahead, where warmth and ale wait behind a warped door. Behind you, the baker's oven flares once more bright as an eye opening in the dark. The inn door gives way with a sigh, and for a moment you stand between street cold and hearth warmth, letting smoke ale damp wool wrap around you. Rushes lie thick over the stone floor, browned by boots and sweetened with dried lavender that has already lost its battle with men and dogs, onions and old beer. A beeswax candle gutters near the door, its flame leaning like a tired monk over a doubtful sermon. You do not sit long. The alehouse is full of talk, and all of it bends toward the baker in the narrow street. A peddler with pilgrim badges sewn across his hat swears. The loaf he bought that morning was so light it might have flown to Canterbury with a blessing and a breeze. A cooper says the crust could mend a chimney. A woman near the hearth presses her thumb into a round loaf wrapped in cloth, testing its spring as if it may confess. The innkeeper gives you thin pottage, warm enough to steam but not thick enough to boast. You dip yesterday's bread into it, and the bread softens, which suddenly feels like a virtue. Under a bench, the one-eared dog accepts you as temporary property. Then the baker's name travels through the room in pieces. Martin of Ash Lane. Martin Ovenhand, some call him, though no one can quite agree whether this is affectionate insulting, or what happens when a man spends 20 years too close to hot brick. His bakehouse stands near a candle-maker and a widow's house, where rosemary dries from the rafters. You hear his father baked before him, his wife keeps accounts on a wax tablet, and his youngest apprentice sleeps above the flour bins, which seems less like training and more like being slowly seasoned. Outside, rain softens to mist, and curiosity tugs you back into the street. You lift your hood and step into the damp throat of town. Shutters are drawn. Water drips from carved beams. Somewhere a child coughs behind a wall. Then a woman murmurs a charm over him, perhaps Saint-Blé, perhaps honey and sage. You follow the smell of rye and ash. Ash Lane earns its name honestly. The walls are streaked with soot, and the gutters hold pale smears of wet flour. The houses lean overhead until the sky becomes a narrow ribbon of blue-black cloth. Your shoulder brushes rough plaster. A hanging sign creaks above you, painted with a loaf, and two crossed peels faded into a sleepy moon. The bakehouse window glows. You stop beneath the eaves. Heat breathes from cracks around the shutters, carrying rye meal sourdough starter, wood smoke wet sacks, old yeast-singed crust, and stale grain. Inside, a peel scrapes brick, a tray knocks against a bench. A man says something low, and another voice answers, younger, anxious, swallowed by the oven's roar. On the step sits a basket of rejected loaves. They are not monstrous. That is the troubling part. They look almost like bread round brown, flour-dusted, some split along the top. But close by you see the signs people mutter over. One loaf is swollen high on one side and collapsed on the other, like a proud noble after bad news. Another is crusted with black ash underneath. A third feels too light when a neighbour lifts it, weighs it in her palm and sets it down with a sniff sharp enough to cut twine. Too much bran, she says. Too much air, says the man beside her. Too much hope, says a third voice from the dark. This is the sort of joke that belongs to hungry places. More neighbours gather, not a crowd, yet a weaver with thread on his sleeve, a servant girl with an empty trencher, a bent man in a balding fur collar. Suspicion is quieter than anger, and lasts longer. They speak of the assize of bread lawful weight grain prices, and whether a baker may keep a fair penny when flour has risen dear. Some swear that in lean years bakers mix ground peas, acorn meal, or chalky dust into dough, though others say such talk grows faster than mould in a damp pantry. The bakehouse door opens. Martin stands there bigger in the doorway than he looked from the lane, his face red from the oven, his beard powdered pale with flour. His leather apron is cracked and dark. Behind him the apprentice holds a lamp, his long face shining with worry. Martin's eyes pass over the neighbours, then over you, and for a heartbeat you feel the awkwardness of being a stranger at someone else's trouble. Bread will be weighed at market, Martin says. His voice is hoarse, not cruel, not gentle. The woman folds her arms. It should have been weighed before my husband paid for it. A few murmurs answer her. The dog appears beside your leg because even he seems to understand that important bread politics are underway. Martin looks at the rejected loaves. The rye came damp, the oven drew unevenly. Ask the miller. Always the miller, says the weaver. Sometimes the miller, Martin replies, and there is almost a smile in it, though it does not survive. No one can quite agree whether bad bread begins in the field, the mill the oven, or the hand that takes the coin. A wet harvest, a cheating miller, a tired apprentice, a smoky oven, a tempted baker, a customer desperate for blame, all may leave fingerprints in the crumb. You stand under the dripping eaves while the neighbours murmur. Above the doorway a sprig of bay has been nailed into the beam meant to guard against fire and ill will. The leaves are dry and probably powerless, though powerlessness has never stopped anyone from trying. At last the woman gathers her loaf and turns away. Others follow, carrying complaints, as if anger too has weight and must not be dropped in the mud. Martin shuts the door, not loudly, but firmly. The glow narrows to a line, then vanishes. You remain in Ash Lane listening to rainwater tick from the roofs. Beyond the crooked houses the evening bell fades and the smell of rye ash and worry clings to your cloak as you turn back toward the alehouse and its half-burned candle. You return to the alehouse and the room receives you as if you have been away for a season instead of a few damp minutes. Heat folds around your face. The hearth snaps softly. Smoke lies under the rafters, blackening beams where hooks hold drying herbs, onions, and one lonely ham bone. Your cloak drips onto the rushes, and the innkeeper glances at the puddle with weary forgiveness. The half-burned candle leans by the door. Its wax has spilled down the iron pricket in pale ridges, and beside it someone has placed a crust of bread, not as an offering exactly, though some swear that leaving a bite near a flame keeps hunger from returning too sharply in the night. Even now it is hard to tell whether the custom belongs to saints' grandmothers or mice with excellent public relations. You take your place near the wall close enough to the hearth to feel your stockings steam, far enough from the main table to listen without seeming hungry for trouble. The dog curls beneath your bench and rests his chin on your boot, which is flattering until you remember your boot smells of road mud. The loaves come out one by one, not from the oven but from cloths, baskets, sleeves and underarms, each carried by someone who wants witnesses. The alehouse becomes a small court before the court, where verdicts are softened in beer before they harden into law. A cooper sets his loaf on the table and cuts it open with a belt knife. The crumb is grey, close and damp at the heart. A laundress pinches it between finger and thumb, rolls it thoughtfully, then sniffs. Poor eyes, she says. Poor flour, says the cooper. Poor honesty, says the narrow woman from Ash Lane, and several heads nod. An old man with a wool blanket over his shoulders lifts a slice toward the candle. He studies the holes in the crumb as if they are stars in a monk's calendar. He claims that too many large holes mean the baker has whipped air into the dough to cheat the weight. A younger man laughs and says air is the only thing in town not yet taxed. This earns a few tired smiles. Another loaf is passed to you. It is warm no longer, but it holds the memory of heat. You feel the crust with your thumb, rough and dark where ash has clung underneath. You raise it carefully to your nose. Rice smoke, sourness, damp grain, and something faintly bitter. You do not know enough to judge which makes you perfectly suited to village opinion. A woman across the table watches your face. Well, you choose wisdom, or at least survival. It has travelled through a difficult evening. This answer satisfies no one but offends no one, which in such rooms is nearly the same as eloquence. Rain taps the shutters. The inn sign creaks outside. Somewhere in the lane a cartwheel bumps over stone and stops with a curse. You remember the broken wheel by the well and imagine the carter still there bargaining with wood iron and patience. More tests begin. A servant girl knocks a loaf against the table and listens. A hollow sound, she says, means deceit. A baker's cousin argues that hollow bread may be honest bread if the dough was lively. A pilgrim with a tin badge of St. Thomas declares that bread baked under an angry moon turns sour by dawn. No one can quite agree whether the moon concerns itself with ovens, but no one fully dismisses it either. Then comes the strangest test. The old man asks for ale. Not to drink, though his face suggests he would accept both purposes. He tears a piece from the suspect loaf and drops it into a shallow wooden bowl. Ale is poured over it, brown and foaming. Everyone leans in while the bread drinks. If it sinks too fast, he says it is underbaked. If it floats too proudly, it is mostly air. If it crumbles into paste, the flour was poor. The bread does all three in an uncertain order, causing a silence of civic disappointment. The innkeeper mutters that bread is meant to fill bellies, not perform miracles in bowls, yet the room keeps watching. Hunger makes scholars of ordinary people. They know the feel of a fair loaf because their hands remember thousands. They know when crust should crack, when crumb should spring, when a trencher should hold stew without surrendering into sorrow. A noble may speak of treaties and bloodlines, but here a woman can tell whether rye has been cut with bean flour by the way it sticks to her molars. You drink a little ale. It is sour, safe and thin, which is perhaps the most honest praise available tonight. Steam rises from bowls of pottage. A man tears smoked fish with his fingers and lays it on a trencher. Above the hearth dried sage and rue hang in bundles. The innkeeper's wife says rue hung near bread keeps envy away from the household. Her husband says it keeps customers from asking for more salt. Those who tell the tale never fully agree which use is stronger. As the hour deepens, the talk grows softer. Anger becomes concern. Concern becomes weariness. Someone wonders whether Martin's wife has enough coin to pay a fine. Someone else says fines teach honest measure. The narrow woman says her husband's tooth still aches. The cooper admits the rye harvest was wet and the miller's stones have chipped before. Suspicion does not vanish, but it loosens its belt. You watch candlelight tremble across the opened loaves. Each one looks less like evidence now and more like somebody's supper failed in ordinary ways. The rain thickens outside, pressing the town into itself. The dog sighs under your bench. The distant church bell gives a muted note through wet air, and all the faces turn briefly toward the sound. Soon the market will wake, and bread will meet iron scales beneath the morning mist. For now you sit in the warm dark listening to rain on shutters and the soft tearing of crust, while the town practices judgment by candlelight as the candle gutters low softly. The alehouse sleep is thin, broken by rain, by snores, by the small complaints of benches pretending to be beds. Before dawn the innkeeper stirs the embers with an iron poker, and the room brightens from black to red to a dull smoky gold. You wake with the dog still against your boot, and the taste of sour ale lingering behind your teeth. Somewhere outside, before any bird is brave enough to sing the monastery bell, begins to mark the dark hour. You rise slowly, stiff from the bench, and step over curled shapes wrapped in cloaks. Rushes whisper underfoot. The half-burned candle near the door has died into a crooked stump, its wax hardened like frozen milk. The innkeeper's wife presses a crust into your hand, more habit than kindness. Though in a place like this the two often wear the same hood. She tells you to eat before the market bell, because buying bread while hungry makes a fool generous. Some swear never to haggle on an empty stomach lest the belly bid higher than the brain. Outside, the town is made of mist. It fills the lanes, hangs from the eaves beads on the shutters, and softens even the sharpest roofs into sleeping shapes. Your boots find old mud beneath new damp. A gutter trickles beside you with a quiet, dirty music. Smoke begins to rise from chimneys as households wake servants raking hearths, wives shaking ashes from pans, apprentices stumbling toward water buckets, children sent to fetch kindling before they have fully become themselves. You follow the pull of sound toward the market square. At first it is only wheels, then hooves, then low voices, sacks dropping wood, knocking against wood, a goat objecting to existence with impressive commitment. By the time you pass the public well, the square has begun to assemble itself from fog and labour. Stalls unfold like rough wooden flowers. Canvas awnings are tied to poles. A fishmonger spreads wet cloth over smoked eels and salted herring. A woman lays out onions, leeks, and winter cabbages, each vegetable glistening as if it too has endured the night and expects recognition. Near the gate, the toll clerk sits beneath a little roof with a lantern and a tablet wrapped in a fur-lined cloak that makes him look broader than his courage. He counts baskets, sacks, wheels, beasts and burdens. A penny for this cart, a halfpenny for that bundle, a murmur over whether two geese tied together count as one trouble or two. No one can quite agree whether the town's tolls pay for Woolsroad's justice or the clerk's remarkable patience, though everyone agrees they pay too much. Merchants grumble and pay. The iron box beside the clerk gives a small clink with each coin. A boy sprinkles sand on a patch of slick stone where a mule nearly falls. Two women argue over stall space without raising their voices, which somehow makes the argument sharper. Above all of it, the church tower appears and disappears in the mist, and its bell waits like a held breath. Then the bread arrives. Not all at once, but in baskets covered with linen on boards, carried between two men in cloth bundles under arms, and on a small cart whose wheels complain with each turn. You smell it before you see it, clearly warm rye, barley maslin, sour leaven, ash, and the faint sweetness of wheat saved for those with better purses. The crowd shifts toward it not greedily, but with a seriousness due to the thing that will hold the day together. Martin of Ash Lane comes last among the bakers. His cart is modest, its handles dark with use. The apprentice walks beside it, eyes lowered, carrying a stack of wooden trenchers. Martin's wife follows with a small purse at her belt and a wax tablet tucked beneath her cloak. Her face is calm in the way of people who cannot afford to show the weather inside them. The dog beside you lifts his head, recognizes the smell of possible breakfast, and becomes deeply invested in justice. At the centre of the square stands a trestle table set for inspection. Two town officers wait there with iron scales, a set of sealed weights, a knife and a ledger. They are the bread assayers. Also the cooper from the alehouse whispers near your shoulder. One is a narrow man with ink on his cuffs. The other is broad, grey-bearded and solemn enough to weigh the sins of angels. Their task is simple in name and difficult in practice. See whether the bread matches the lawful price weight and quality for the grain and season. The market bell rings. It does not start the day so much as admit the day has already been working for an hour. People gather cloaks pulled close breath mingling with mist. The assayers begin with the loaves of a widow whose bread is dark but heavy. They lift a way-cut smell. The knife enters crust with a crack that seems loud in the cold. Steam escapes one loaf in a soft ghost. The broad assayer nods. The widow crosses herself quickly, perhaps in thanks, perhaps because one should never trust good fortune until it has gone home. Loaf after loaf meets the scales. The iron weights sit like small blunt judges. A clerk records marks in the ledger, his quill scratching steadily. He warms his fingers over a little charcoal pan between entries. Nearby, a seller of ribbons ties red thread around his wrist to ward off stiffness from the cold. Some swear red thread draws pain away from joints, though it may simply remind the wearer to complain less visibly. When Martin's basket is opened, the murmurs return. The loaves are placed on the table under the grey morning. One, then another, then another. You see the assayer's thumb press the crust, the knife split the crumb, the scale beam dip, hesitate, rise. Mist beads on Martin's beard. His wife watches the ledger, not the faces. The apprentice holds the empty cloth so tightly his knuckles pale. The broad assayer lifts a loaf darkened underneath by ash. He does not speak at once. He turns it in both hands, weighing more than bread, whether price, rumour, hunger, pride. Around you the market waits. Fish drip on boards. Mules breathe steam. The bell's last note fades from the tower, leaving only the tiny creak of the scales and the waking town listening. The market square does not erupt when Martin's loaves finish their turn beneath the scale. That would be too quick, too simple, and this town prefers its judgments the way it prefers its winter. Broth, slow-clouded and stretched a little further than comfort recommends. The broad assayer says only that several loaves must be examined again within the guild hall, where the measures are kept dry. The ledger sits flat and the witnesses can be made to speak in order, instead of all at once like geese disputing a pond. So you drift with the others across the square, drawn by cold curiosity, and the ordinary human hope that if someone else's morning is becoming complicated, your own may feel better by comparison. The guild hall stands on the far side of the market, a stout timbered building with a steep roof and narrow windows shuttered against the damp. Its oak door is iron-banded and polished smooth, where many hands have pushed it over many years. A carved beam above the entry bears the faded marks of trades, a loaf, a sheaf, a barrel, a spindle. The figures are worn by rain and soot until they seem less like symbols than memories. Beside the steps, 2 broken cart spokes lean against the wall, perhaps waiting repair, perhaps simply too stubborn to be thrown away. In a town like this, even rubbish likes to feel employed. You step inside with the others and the air changes at once. It is warmer than the square, though not by much, and carries the smells of damp wool, ink, old wood, beeswax, and the faint metallic scent of scales handled by cold fingers. Rushes lie thin over the floorboards. At one end of the hall burns a small hearth, whose smoke has taught the rafters a permanent shade of sorrow. Candles stand in iron holders along the walls, their flames steady and yellow. None are fresh. Every candle here has already lived a little, as if even light must submit to thrift. The dog with the torn ear tries to follow you in, and is chased out by a porter with a broom, though not with much conviction. He settles in the doorway anyway, where he can keep one eye on civic order and the other on dropped crumbs. At the centre of the hall stands a heavy table. On it rest the town's official measures, iron weights of different sizes stamped and sealed, a beam scale blackened by use, a grain measure with its rim worn smooth, and a knife laid across a cloth as neatly as if it too has sworn an oath. A clerk sits at the corner with the ledger open, turning pages with careful fingers. His nails are ink-stained, and a little charcoal brazier smoulders beside him. He warms one hand over it, writes a line, then warms the other as if justice itself might freeze if not occasionally toasted. Martin stands near the table with his wife and apprentice. He looks less like a man accused than a man interrupted at the centre of work he cannot afford to abandon. Flour still powders his sleeves. His wife has tucked the wax tablet into her belt, though she keeps touching it, as if to reassure herself it remains there. The apprentice stares at the floor. You suspect he would rather wrestle the oven shovel than the morning. Witnesses gather along the wall, the narrow woman from Ash Lane, the cooper, the weaver, a servant girl and 2 others, whose loyalty appears to belong chiefly to being present when anything interesting occurs. No one can quite agree whether a witness comes to help the truth defend a grievance or simply warm himself indoors while events unfold, likely all three. The broad assayer clears his throat. His grey beard seems almost part of the institution, as though the Guildhall itself has grown facial hair in order to look more serious. He lifts the first loaf and places it once more on the scale. The iron weights are set opposite. The beam dips and hovers, then settles just a little wrong. Short, says the narrow assayer. Not dramatically short, not criminal in the theatrical sense, just short enough to trouble the room. Another loaf is weighed, then another. Some meet the measure, some do not. One is proper in weight but scorched beneath. One is fair enough in crust but close and damp at the centre when cut. The knife makes a crisp sound entering the crust, then a softer one through the crumb. You find yourself listening to bread as if it might explain itself. The broad assayer breaks a piece and smells it. He passes it to the narrow assayer, who does the same. Then to your surprise he passes it to the clerk, who sniffs solemnly and nods with all the authority of a man whose talent appears to involve agreeing in permanent ink. There is bitterness, says the narrow assayer. Dampry Martin answers. Or old meal, says the cooper from the wall. Or careless storage, says the narrow woman. Martin's wife lifts her chin. The sacks were dry when they came from the mill. Some swear that meal stored beside onions turns sullen, and dough mixed by a quarrelsome hand never rises properly. Even now it is hard to tell whether such beliefs come from experienced superstition or the deep medieval conviction that almost anything may become moral if discussed long enough. The assayers move from finished bread to flour. A sack brought from Martin's cart is opened. The grain meal is rubbed between fingers lifted to the light, examined for coarseness, husk grit, and the telltale signs of adulteration. A few pale flecks draw murmurs from the witnesses. Bran, perhaps, or poor sifting, or simply what rye chooses to be when the year has been wet and the miller impatient. The broad assayer asks where the grain was ground. At Hobford, Martin says, "This produces a low rustle of reaction because apparently Hobford Mill has a reputation for blunt stones and sharper bargains." The weaver folds his arms and mutters that Hobford would grind a saint's finger bone if it could be sold as meal. No one laughs, which suggests the joke may be closer to civic policy than humour. The clerk writes. Then the sealed measure is filled. Flour is levelled with a straight wooden rod, neither packed nor fluffed, because there are rules even for how uncertainty is supposed to sit. The weight is compared to the standard. The assayers speak quietly. Martin's wife closes her eyes for one breath only. The apprentice shifts from one foot to the other, making the board creak. You stand near the wall beneath a candle whose wax has run down in pale folds like the stump back at the inn door. The same smell of wet wool clings to the room. Outside, through the shutter crack, you hear distant market noise continuing without pause, traders calling hooves, scuffing a goat voicing theological objections. The town goes on while bread is judged because it must. At last, the broad assayer rests both hands on the table. It is not yet plain, he says, whether this is deceit, negligence, or ill fortune compounded by poor grain. Those who tell the tale never fully agree which of these is easiest to forgive. Ill fortune may be pitied. Negligence may be scolded. Deceit once named settles into a room like smoke. No final sentence is given here, not yet. Instead, the witnesses are told to remain ready. The loaves will be noted, the measures recorded, complaints preserved. The matter must go onward, carried from scale to authority like a spark moved from one candle to the next. And in the Guildhall's close air, with iron weights cold on the table, and Martin's future hanging somewhere between rye dust and ink, you begin to understand how a loaf can become a trial long before anyone speaks the word punishment. From the Guildhall, the matter moves slowly as everything official seems to move in a town where ink dries faster than decisions. The assayers cover Martin's questionable loaves with a linen cloth, as if the bread itself has become shy, and the clerk closes his ledger with a soft thump that sounds far heavier than parchment has any right to sound. Outside, the market keeps breathing in the mist. Barley changes hands, fish are wrapped. A child cries because his mother will not buy him a honey cake, which seems from his expression to be the collapse of all earthly justice. You follow the small procession toward the manor hall. It stands near the churchyard where leaning stones push through wet grass and crows step about with the black-robed patience of minor officials. The hall is older than the guild house, longer and lower, with timber walls patched in places by stone and clay. Its roof is steep and dark, slick from rain. Smoke escapes from a hole above the central hearth, and then changes its mind, drifting back under the eaves, as though it too wants to hear the complaints. The dog comes with you, though. He keeps a respectful distance from men holding staffs. He trots past the broken cartwheel still propped near the well, sniffs it once, and seems to judge it beyond help. At the hall door, villagers gather in damp clusters. Some have come because they bought bread. Some have come because bread concerns everyone. Some have come because a manor court offers warmth gossip, and the possibility of seeing a neighbour embarrassed in public, which in winter may count as entertainment. A man in a patched hood carries a hen under one arm, though no one knows why. No one can quite agree whether he has business before the court or simply believes the hen deserves legal education. You step inside. The hall is draughty despite its size, and the rushes scattered over the packed floor release a sour green smell beneath wet boots. A long hearth smoulders in the centre, sending up smoke that darkens the rafters and stings the eyes, just enough to remind everyone they are alive. Along the walls stand worn oak benches polished by generations of anxious backsides. At the far end, on a raised dais, a heavier chair waits beneath a faded hanging embroidered with hunting dogs, though the dogs now look more like tired sheep after too many winters of smoke. Reeves' jurors, clerks, and local men of standing begin to take their places. The Reeve is a square-shouldered man with a narrow belt and an expression trained to distrust weather cattle and excuses. Beside him sits the steward's clerk, thinner than a rake handle, arranging quills, wax tablets, scraps of parchment, and a little knife for trimming his pen. His fingers are stained black from ink, and he carries himself with the quiet importance of one who can turn speech into record and record into trouble. The jurors sit together on a bench, 12 men of the town and nearby fields, though the number seems less impressive once you notice half of them are still rubbing sleep from their faces. They are bakers, brewers, smallholders, a tanner, a mill servant, and one elderly man who appears to have been included because he remembers every quarrel since the last bad harvest, and can recite them in order if not stopped early. A monk from the nearby abbey stands near the wall, his hood low, his sleeves tucked into each other. You notice him because he watches the covered loaves with a strange stillness. Perhaps he's come on behalf of abbey bread sold in the town. Perhaps he's only keeping warm. Some swear that monks can judge bread by sound alone, tapping a loaf and hearing the honesty of the crumb. Even now it is hard to tell whether this is wisdom training or what people say when a man is quiet long enough. Martin enters with his wife and apprentice. He has washed his hands, but flour remains in the creases of his knuckles, pale as old snow. His wife carries the wax tablet, and the apprentice carries nothing at all, which somehow makes him look more burdened. They stand near the table where the linen-covered loaves are placed. The broad assayer waits beside them, beard damp from mist. The narrow assayer whispers with the clerk, who nods and scratches a note. A bell sounds from the church tower, not loud here, but softened by walls and smoke. Its note passes through the hall, and for a moment everyone settles as if the town's own breath has been counted. The Reeve speaks first, not with drama, but with the tired firmness of a man who has heard too many versions of the same human weakness. Complaints have been brought, he says, concerning the bread of Martin of Ashlane loaves, said to be short of lawful weight, scorched beneath bitter in crumb, and unfit for fair sale at the price charged. The words are plain. In the smoky air they seem to take on shape and sit on the table beside the bread. Witnesses are called. The narrow woman from Ashlane steps forward with her loaf wrapped in cloth. She unwraps it carefully, almost tenderly, though her mouth is set hard. She speaks of paying good coin, of finding the underside black with ash of her husband biting grit, and cursing so loudly the neighbour's baby woke. The clerk records what matters and silently discards what does not, though you suspect the baby's outrage deserves its own line. The cooper follows. He says his loaf was too light, and that it failed to fill his household as it ought. He does not shout. He holds his cap in both hands and looks more sad than angry. Bread is not luxury to him. It is the floor under the day. When that floor gives way, every step feels uncertain. The servant girl speaks next, sent by her mistress, who's too grand or too ill or too annoyed to come herself. She says the bread would not serve as a proper trencher beneath stew and softened into paste before the meal was done. This produces murmurs because a failed trencher is a serious domestic betrayal. A trencher should hold gravy with dignity. It should not collapse like a coward in broth. Martin listens. His wife listens harder. When Martin is allowed to answer, he speaks of damp rye, faulty drawing in the oven, and the mill at Hobford. He does not deny that some loaves were poor. He denies that poor was the same as false. His voice stays steady, though you see one hand close and open at his side. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether a calm man is innocent practised, or simply too tired to tremble. The mill servant on the jury shifts at the mention of Hobford. The old juror leans toward him as if hoping for a quarrel to warm his bones. None comes. The monk by the wall lowers his head, perhaps in prayer, perhaps to hide a smile, perhaps because smoke has entered his eyes. More complaints are heard. One man admits his loaf tasted fair but looked suspicious, which seems difficult to punish, but easy to understand. Another says Martin's father never sold such bread, and the hall murmurs at that because the dead are famously excellent bakers in memory. A woman with red hands says the price of grain has risen, and maybe any baker would struggle. The narrow woman replies that hardship does not lighten a loaf by itself. The clerk writes and writes. Candles burn lower. Smoke thickens beneath the rafters. Outside carts creak through the wet square, and the market continues beyond the hall's closed door. Inside the court gathers the town's hunger, suspicion, pity, and habit into something that may soon become judgment. But not yet. For now you stand near the worn oak bench, hands tucked into your cloak, listening as bread is weighed once more in words, before it is weighed in consequence. The hall grows warmer only because more bodies have pressed themselves into it, not because the hearth has discovered any new ambition. Smoke curls upward in uncertain layers, finding rafters, beams, and noses with equal devotion. You shift your weight near the oak bench, feeling the damp in your boots, and the slow ache that comes from standing through other people's justice. Around you, cloaks steam faintly. The rushes underfoot are crushed flat where villagers have shuffled, whispered, and leaned close enough to hear every word without appearing too eager. The reeve calls for silence again, and this time the hall obeys more quickly. Even the man with the hen adjusts his grip, and the bird tucks its head, as if it too understands that bread has entered the serious part of the morning. The covered loaves are uncovered once more. They sit on the table like small brown witnesses, each bearing its own trouble, one short one, scorched one, damp-hearted one, bitter enough to wrinkle the mouth. The broad assayer places his hand beside them, not touching at first, as if the bread may speak if given one last chance. No such miracle occurs. Medieval loaves, like many medieval officials, prefer others to do the talking. The clerk reads from the ledger. His voice is dry and even, and each phrase seems to settle over Martin's shoulders like another layer of wet wool. Lawful weight, market price, common assize, poor baking, suspected short measure, complaints received, witnesses sworn. The words are not grand, but they are heavy. You can see how a life may be pressed down by such plain language, not all at once, but line by line. Then the first punishment is named, a fine. It is said simply, almost gently, but the room changes. A fine means coin, and coin means flour. Not bought wood, not stacked rent, delayed a child's winter shoes patched again instead of replaced. For a lord or merchant, a fine may be an irritation. For a baker in a narrow lane, it may be the difference between standing upright and leaning forever. The reeve explains that if Martin has sold bread below lawful weight, or bread unfit for the price taken, he may be amerced according to the court's judgment. The sum is not yet fixed. The clerk dips his quill, and the little scratch of writing follows the statement like a rat behind a granary wall. Martin's wife's hand moves to the wax tablet at her belt. Her thumb presses into it through the cloth. You remember hearing that she keeps the accounts, and you wonder how many marks she has already made there. Sacks owed, wood bought, toll paid, flour, lost coin promised. Some swear a household account scratched in wax tells a truer confession than any priest may hear, though no one quite agrees whether numbers are honest because they cannot lie, or cruel because they do not care. A second consequence follows: the loaves may be seized. At that the narrow woman from Ash Lane gives a small nod, not triumphant, only satisfied, in the restrained way of someone who has carried anger carefully and does not wish to spill it. The seized bread, the reeve says, may be taken from sale, destroyed if judged unfit, or given away if merely poor, but still safe for hungry mouths. The monk by the wall looks up at this, his face unreadable beneath his hood. Perhaps he thinks of alms. Perhaps he thinks of abbey rules. Perhaps he thinks as monks sometimes do about supper while appearing to think of heaven. The broad assayer lifts the scorched loaf. He turns it over. The blackened underside faces the hall. A murmur runs through the villagers, then fades. The bread is not poison. It is not rot. It is failure made visible. Still, in a town where most people count their meals by the day, and not by desire, failure can feel very close to betrayal. Then comes the matter of public shame. No pillory is brought in, no sentence fully shaped, not yet. But the possibility is spoken aloud, and that is enough. The reeve says a baker found cheating. The assize may be made known before the market, so that all may understand the fault and measure their trust accordingly. The words are careful. The meaning is not. A man may pay a fine and earn it back, but a stained name lingers in lanes at wells, near ovens, and in every hand that tests a loaf before paying. Martin lowers his eyes for the first time. The apprentice looks at him, and then away. His own face has gone pale beneath flour dust. You wonder whether he mixed the dough, banked the fire, turned the loaves too late, or slept when he should have watched the oven mouth. You wonder whether he fears being blamed or not being blamed enough. In such households, guilt can be passed like a hot coal from hand to hand, burning everyone a little. Martin asks to speak. The reeve allows it. He steps forward, not grandly, because there is no room for grandeur between a bread table and 12 tired jurors. His voice is rough from smoke and early rising. He says he has baked for the town since his father's hands failed. He says he has stood through nights when others slept, fed ovens through frost-bought grain, when prices climbed like thieves over a wall. He says the rye was damp, the millstones at Hob Ford through grit, and the draught in the oven shifted after a brick cracked near the back. The old juror leans forward at this. Why not mend it? Martin's mouth tightens. With what coin after Michaelmas rent a silence follows. Everyone knows the answer though, knowing does not settle the matter. Poverty may explain a cracked oven. It does not make a light loaf heavy. Martin does not plead innocence like a minstrel in a lord's hall. He pleads smallness. He says he did not mean to cheat. He says some loaves were wrong, and he would make good where he can. He offers to replace bread for those who bring back the worst of it, though the cooper mutters that eaten bread cannot be returned unless saints have changed the rules overnight. A few people smile despite themselves. No one can quite agree whether Martin's offer is fairness fear or the quick arithmetic of a man trying to keep his oven from becoming an enemy. His wife speaks once quietly and says they have 3 sacks due from the mill and 1 debt owed by a manor kitchen that has not yet paid for feast bread. The clerk writes that down too, though his face suggests sympathy is not one of the authorised measures on the table. The narrow woman asks about her husband's tooth. Martin looks at her. I will pay the tooth drawer if it was my grit. This creates another murmur because tooth drawers are feared nearly as much as bad bread, and often with better reason. Some swear a clove held against the gum eases toothache. Others trust sage salt or a whispered prayer to Saint Apollonia. Those who tell the tale never fully agree which remedy helps most, though they agree the tooth drawer's pliers encourage sudden interest in prayer. The reeve lifts his hand. The hall quiets. No final punishment is given in full, but its shape has entered the room, coin paid, bread, seized shame, named restitution considered. The law does not fall like a sword here. It settles like dust covering shoulders, tables, ledgers and loaves until everyone can see where it has landed. You stand in the dim hall as the candles burn lower. Outside the market noise thins toward midday. The dog scratches at the door. Martin returns to his place beside his wife, smaller somehow, though still broad and flour-marked. The bread remains on the table between him and the town, no longer merely food, not yet punishment, but something in between, a measure of trust cracked open under candlelight. The court does not send Martin straight to the square, as if a man may be folded neatly from judgment into shame without passing through the long corridor of arrangements. First there is talk. There is always talk. The jurors lean together like old fence posts in a wind. The reeve lowers his voice with the broad assayer, and the clerk trims his quill with a little knife, as though the next line of rink must be sharpened before it can wound anyone properly. You wait near the wall where the smoke is thinner and the draught slips through a crack between timbers. The dog scratches again at the outer door, then gives up and lies down with a sigh, so human it nearly deserves legal standing. The man with the hen has vanished, or perhaps the hen has won its case and gone home. At last the reeve speaks. Martin is not named a wicked man. That seems important. He's not accused of poisoning, nor of mixing chalk by the handful, nor of selling sawdust wrapped in crust, though such stories travel eagerly through towns that enjoy imagining distant villains more colourful than local mistakes. His fault is set down more carefully, several loaves found short of lawful weight, several unfit for the price taken, and negligence in maintaining oven and measure during a season when grain is dear. The fine will be modest but painful. The worst loaves will be seized. And for the warning of the market, Martin must stand for a short while in the square, with the faulty bread displayed beside him. The word pillory moves through the hall before anyone fully says it. Some lips tighten, some eyes brighten. Public shame is a strange fire. Everyone claims to dislike its heat, yet many step closer to warm their hands. No one can quite agree whether such punishment protects the poor, humbles, the dishonest satisfies the angry, or merely gives gossip a wooden frame to lean on. Martin's wife closes her eyes again, longer this time. The apprentice looks as if he has swallowed ash. Martin gives one stiff nod. and for a moment you think he will protest, but he does not. Perhaps he knows refusal would only lengthen the shadow. Perhaps he's too tired. Perhaps, as those who tell such tales often disagree, a man who has lived by public trust must sometimes repair it in public, even when the repair feels like being taken apart. The hall empties slowly. Outside, the mist has lifted enough for the market square to show its true colours: brown mud, grey stone, dark timber, pale winter faces and awnings sagging under old rain. The bell tower rises above the roofs. Pigeons wheel around it with the loose confidence of creatures never summoned before a court. The seized loaves are brought on a board by the porter and the narrow assayer. They are covered with linen, but everyone seems to know what lies beneath, because a covered disgrace is often more interesting than an uncovered one. Near the centre of the square stands the pillory. You had not noticed it before, though now it seems impossible to miss. It is not tall, not grand, not theatrical. It is a wooden frame darkened by weather set upon a low platform with holes for head and hands. Beside it is the market cross worn smooth at the edges, and beyond that the public well with its damp rope and iron bucket. Ordinary things surround it: cabbage baskets, fish boards, a ribbon seller, a woman mending a torn sleeve in the shelter of a stall. That is what makes it heavier. Punishment here is not hidden in some distant dungeon. It stands where people buy onions. A town servant checks the frame, lifting the wooden bar and lowering it again. The hinge groans. Another man sweeps mud from the platform with a birch broom, though the mud appears deeply committed to remaining. Someone brings a small placard, not with grand letters for a crowd far away, but with a plain mark and a short notice the clerk has written. The clerk himself reads it once, frowns, and adds another word. Ink is civic weather. It changes the air. You stand beneath the edge of an awning watching the preparations unfold with unsettling calm. No drums beat, no one shouts. The fishmonger continues arranging herring. A brewer's boy rolls a barrel across the square and nearly drops it into a puddle. Two children are pulled back by their mother when they creep too close, though she keeps watching over their heads. A pilgrim touches the badge on his hat and murmurs that Saint Honoré should keep all bakers honest. Another replies that saints have many ovens to inspect and cannot be expected to catch every scorched bottom before breakfast. Some swear that a man who stands in the pillory should not be mocked after the church bell rings noon, because mercy returns with the Angelus. Others say mercy should arrive earlier if the weather is poor. Even now it is hard to tell whether these customs are law kindness or simply the town's way of making cruelty feel measured. Martin is led to the platform. He walks without chains, escorted by the Reeves man and followed by his wife, though she's made to stop at the edge of the gathered crowd. She does not weep. That would give the town too much to hold. Instead, she stands with her hands folded in her cloak face, steady eyes fixed on the back of his flour-dusted neck. The apprentice stays beside her, staring at the mud. The faulty loaves are uncovered and placed on a board near the pillory. The scorched underside is turned outward. The short loaves sit beside the scale weights so anyone may see the matter plainly. This is not merely punishment, it is instruction. The town teaches with wood bread and watching eyes. Martin bends as the wooden bar is lifted. His head and hands are set into place. The bar lowers. The latch falls with a dull sound, less dramatic than you expected, and somehow worse for being ordinary. The crowd murmurs. A few call out sharp words. Most do not. The narrow woman from Ash Lane comes close, looks at the loaves, then at Martin, and says nothing. The cooper removes his cap. The old juror watches with folded arms. The monk from the hall stands near the market, crosses hood shadowing his face, and you cannot tell whether he approves, pities, or merely observes the shape of human order, The dog sits at the foot of the platform, ears tilted as if guarding a man he barely knows from threats he does not understand. Time slows. Rain begins again, very fine, silvering Martin's hair and darkening the shoulders of his tunic. Market life continues around him, but altered. Coins still pass. Bargains still form. Children still stare. Yet every loaf sold that morning is weighed in the mind before it is taken in the hand. Every baker in the square stands a little straighter. Every buyer presses a thumb into crust with new seriousness. You feel the lesson settle through the town, not like thunder, but like damp through wool. Bad bread is not a small thing here. It is a broken promise placed on a family board, a hunger made sharper, a coin turned sour. And punishment in this place of bells and mud and smoke is not only pain or payment. It is memory arranged where everyone must pass it. The noon bell begins at last, soft at first, then fuller over the square. The Reeves man steps forward to lift the bar. Martin remains still for one breath before he straightens blinking rain from his eyes. No cheer rises, no great forgiveness either. Only the market resuming the scales, creaking, the seized loaves damp beneath the linen, and the smell of rye and ash lingering in the cold air. When Martin is released, the square does not soften around him at once. It loosens by inches like a knot in wet rope. The Reeves man lifts the bar, the broad baker straightens, and for a moment he stands with his hands hanging at his sides, wrists marked by pressure face damp with rain and something hard to name. His wife steps toward him, then stops because the market is still watching, and comfort offered too soon may become another thing for people to judge. The seized loaves are covered again. A town servant brings a low handcart, the same kind used for carrying sacks of barley rushes, or a drunk uncle who has overestimated harvest ale and underestimated gravity. Its wheels are narrow and caked with old mud. The porter lays the board of faulty bread inside, then folds the linen over it, almost priestly. Bad bread, once displayed, becomes private again. You follow when the cart begins to move. No one commands you to go. No one prevents it. In this town, following a cart is not suspicious. Carts are how news travels when it is too tired to walk. The dog trots ahead, tail low, sniffing puddles, pausing at every doorway as if checking whether justice has left crumbs. Rain thickens from silver mist into drizzle. It freckles the linen cover and darkens the porter's hood. The market square falls behind in layers fishboards, ribbon stall well, the pillory standing empty again, looking almost innocent without a man bent into it. Almost. Wooden things, remember. The cart turns down a lane of shop fronts. Here the town presses close again. A cobbler sits beneath his awning, stitching a sole by pale daylight, his fingers brown and quick around waxed thread. Beside him, shoes hang from pegs like sleeping animals. Across the lane, a candle-maker trims wicks while his apprentice scrapes spilled wax into a pot. The smell is sweet and faintly holy, which seems unfair beside the gutter's perfume. Women lean from doorways to watch the cart pass. Too harsh, one says. It was only poor rye. Poor rye still took good coin, another replies. He stood long enough, says a third. Long enough for who says the narrow woman from Ashlane appearing behind you with her cloak tight under her chin. She has a talent for arriving wherever bread is discussed, which in this town may qualify as civic service. The porter keeps pushing. His breath comes out in clouds. The cartwheel strikes a stone and jolts. Beneath the linen the loaves shift with a soft thud. Everyone hears it. A little silence follows as though the bread has objected. At a corner shrine the porter slows. The shrine is set into a niche between a spice cellar and a shuttered house. A painted saint looks out through smoke-dark varnish, one hand raised the other, holding what may once have been a palm branch but now resembles a spoon. Below the image offerings crowd the ledge, a bent pin blue cloth. a cracked pilgrim badge and a candle burned down to a knob. Some swear that placing a pin at a roadside shrine keeps lies from entering the market. No one can quite agree whether this works best on merchants' husbands or officials. The porter touches 2 fingers to his brow as he passes. The narrow woman crosses herself. The cooper does the same after a moment, perhaps because everyone else has made the air feel watched. You do not know the saint's name. It may not matter. In a town full of hunger and accounts, any painted face can become a listener. The cart moves on. At the baker's lane, Martin and his wife do not follow. They turn toward Ash Lane, walking side by side without touching. The apprentice trails behind them, carrying the empty cloths from the market. You see him glance once toward the seized loaves, then down at his boots. Some swear apprentices sleep with a crust beneath the pillow to dream of honest trade. Others say they sleep so hard from work that dreams do not dare disturb them. Even now it is hard to tell whether such customs are tender or merely what tired people say about tired labour. The cart's destination becomes clear near the poor end of town, where houses shrink, walls buckle, and smoke leaks through thatch patched with reeds. Here the lanes smell of cabbage water, wet straw, and cold hearth ash. An old man carries water from the well in 2 buckets balanced on a yoke. A girl gathers fallen twigs from beneath a woodpile and hides the smallest under her apron. At the almshouse door the porter stops. The monk from the court is waiting there. His hood is still low, but rain beads on the wool like glass. Beside him stands a lay brother with a basket and a knife. They uncover the loaves. The worst scorched crusts are cut away. The damp centres are examined. The bitter loaf is set aside with a frown. The others, poor but edible, are sliced for those who need bread more than pride. A few townspeople grumble that bad bread should be burned, not given. Others say hunger makes fewer objections than justice. The monk says nothing. He simply cuts steady and quiet, laying pieces into the basket. The dog sits politely, which is either hope or holiness. You watch steam rise from the almshouse door as someone opens it from within. Warmth breathes out pottage bodies, damp wool drying near embers. Thin hands reach for the bread, not eagerly, carefully. There is dignity even in receiving what others rejected. The narrow woman sees this and looks away first. The rain softens again. The cart stands empty, its wooden bed marked with crumbs and ash. Around you the argument does not end. It only grows quieter, absorbed by lanes, shrines, shop fronts, damp walls. Whether justice has been served remains uncertain, and perhaps that is why people keep telling the story. A bad loaf can be weighed. Mercy cannot. As evening leans toward the town once more, you turn back through the mud with the dog beside you, following the faint bell from the abbey and the smell of wet wool, rye and smoke. The abbey bell draws you out of the poorer lanes as dusk gathers again, its sound spreading over the town walls and wet fields in slow bronze circles. You follow it through a postern gate where the stones are slick with moss, and the guard is more interested in warming his hands over a brazier than asking why a muddy stranger and a one-eared dog wish to leave before dark. Beyond the wall the road bends toward the abbey guest house, past leafless willows, black water and fields under winter stubble. The town falls behind you, but not the smell of bread. It clings to your cloak, rye ash, damp crumb smoke, the faint bitterness of judgment. The dog trots beside you with the careful optimism of a creature who has learned that humans often drop food when they become emotional. Rain beads on his torn ear. Your boots sink into the track, pull-free sink again. Medieval roads are less roads than long negotiations with mud, and the mud is clearly winning. Ahead the abbey rises low and pale beyond an orchard of bare trees. Its church tower holds the last grey of evening. Crows lift from the roof as the bell rings again for vespers. Near the outer gate a roadside cross leans under a little roof, its wood dark from weather, its base crowded with pebbles, wilted herbs, and a strip of cloth tied there by someone asking for a cure, a safe birth, or better luck than yesterday. Some swear that tying cloth to a holy place leaves sickness behind as the cloth rots. No one can quite agree whether the illness obeys, but the knots remain. At the guest house door, a lay brother receives you with a lantern and a look that has measured many travellers. His wool habit smells of rain and smoke. He does not ask many questions. Questions are for officials and relatives. Guest houses prefer bowls, blankets, and knowing when not to pry. He lets the dog in after a pause, perhaps because mercy is easier when it is small, wet, and looking up with theatrical sorrow. Inside, warmth gathers slowly. The guest house is a long room with whitewashed walls, a low hearth, wooden benches, and rushes over the floor. Pilgrims sit along the walls, unlacing boots, rubbing sore feet, hanging damp cloaks on pegs. A woman with a scallop shell badge sleeps upright beneath a wool blanket. A merchant counts coins under his breath with the tenderness of a man saying prayers to silver. In one corner a scribe dries a sheet near the fire, careful not to let the parchment curl. His fingers are black with ink, and the smell of oak gall rises when he moves. You're given ale, thin but clean, and a bowl of pottage thickened with barley. Beside it lies abbey bread. It is darker than noble bread, heavier than festival bread, but honest in the hand. The crust is firm, the crumb close and warm. You tear it slowly and steam lifts into the candlelight. After the day's accusations, the simple strength of it feels almost tender. The monk from the court sits near the hearth. You recognize him by the stillness before you see his face. His hood is pushed back now, showing a narrow brow and tired eyes. He has been cutting bread for the almshouse, and crumbs still cling to his sleeve. The lay brother brings him a cup, and for a while he says nothing, watching the fire settle round the logs. You sit nearby. The dog lies between you both, not choosing sides, though his nose points toward the monk's sleeve. At last the monk speaks softly, not as if beginning a lesson, but as if continuing a thought that has travelled with him from the market square. Bread, he says, is troublesome because it looks humble and is not. It binds field, mill, oven, table, law, and soul. A bad loaf can be a mistake, a hunger, a theft, or a warning that winter is leaning harder on the door. He does not defend Martin. He does not condemn him. He says the rule of St. Benedict calls for bread by measure, because even monks must learn that appetite has edges. In the abbey bakehouse, the cellarer keeps grain under lock, the oven is swept before dawn, and the loaves for guests, brothers, servants, and alms are counted separately. A novice once marked the wrong tally on a feast day, he says, and half the community received smaller portions until a sharp-eyed cook noticed the error. The novice was given extra psalms, which sounds mild until you consider medieval psalms after hauling water. The monk almost smiles. Outside, rain whispers against the shutters. Inside, the fire lowers into red caves. The guest house breathes with sleeping travellers, wet wool herbs and warm barley. A pilgrim near the wall rubs her heels with goose fat and yarrow, trusting the mixture to keep blisters from turning cruel. Some swear yarrow gathered at dawn on a saint's day works better than any other, though those who tell the tale never fully agree which saint is most interested in feet. The monk tells you that seized bread often finds its way to alms if it can be safely eaten. Mercy, he says, does not make a short loaf full weight. It does not mend a cheated coin, but it can keep failure from becoming pure waste. The law teaches the market. Alms feed the hungry. Penance instructs the soul. All three may be needed because people are rarely simple enough for one answer. You look down at the bread in your hand. Its warmth has faded, but it still yields when you press the crumb. You think of Martin standing in the rain, his wife holding her account tablet, the apprentice pale beside her, the narrow woman looking away at the almshouse door. You think of iron scales and open hands. In this world, justice and mercy are not opposites so much as two tired travellers sharing one narrow bench by the fire. The bell rings Compline. The lay brother lowers the lamps. Someone banks the hearth with ash. You wrap yourself in a wool blanket smelling faintly of lanolin smoke and previous strangers. The dog circles 3 times, collapses against your knee and sighs as if he personally settled bread and law. Beyond the shutters the abbey darkens into rain and prayer, and sleep comes slowly warm as a loaf cooling beneath linen. Morning arrives without brightness. It seeps into the abbey guest house through horn-paned windows, turning the whitewashed walls the colour of watered milk. The fire has fallen into a red bed under grey ash, and the room smells of damp cloaks, old straw barley pottage, and the faint clean sweetness of bread cooling somewhere beyond the cloister. You wake beneath the wool blanket with one shoulder colder than the other, which seems to be the official posture of medieval rest. The dog wakes before you do stretches with solemn grandeur and noses your hand as though you're late for a meeting he has arranged. The bell rings for prime. Its note passes over the guest-house roof, over the orchard, over the wet fields and into your bones. Pilgrims stir along the walls. A merchant fastens his purse beneath his tunic. The ink-stained scribe wraps his dry sheet in cloth with more tenderness than some people show infants. A lay brother brings bread ale and a small bowl of onions stewed soft enough to forgive the morning. You eat slowly. Abbey bread is plain, dense and steady. No one praises it aloud, which may be the highest praise bread can earn here. It simply does its work. The monk from the hearth passes by with a basket on his arm. He nods once, and you notice a crumb caught in his sleeve, a small remnant of yesterday's mercy. Soon you're back on the pilgrim road. It runs east from the abbey, a brown ribbon between Winterfield's hedges and bare trees where crows sit like dropped pieces of night. Frost holds in the hollows, though mud waits underneath with patient malice. Your boots crack the thin skin of ice in cart ruts. The dog trots ahead, then behind, then ahead again, performing the unnecessary but sincere labour of a guide who does not know the destination. You travel with others now. A peddler with a pack of needles, ribbons, bone combs, and little tin badges walks near you, his hat bright with tokens from shrines he may or may not have truly visited. A woman with a pilgrim staff limps steadily, her cloak patched in 3 colours. 2 brothers drive a mule cart carrying sacks of onions and a small chest that rattles whenever the wheel finds a stone. The road is safer in company, or at least less lonely when it becomes unsafe. As the town falls behind, its judgment grows larger in talk. The peddler has heard of Martin by noon, though he claims he knew of him before breakfast, before the bell, before perhaps Martin himself was born. Peddlers collect rumours the way cloaks collect burrs. He says that in a town beyond the marsh, a baker once sold loaves so short that the mayor had him dragged through the market on a hurdle with the bad bread tied round his neck. The pilgrim woman says she heard the same tale, but in her version, the baker was made to ride backward on a donkey. One of the cart brothers says it was not a donkey but a pig, and the pig was the only honest party present. No one can quite agree whether the story happened anywhere at all. Yet everyone enjoys repairing it as they walk. The peddler lowers his voice and tells of dunking. In some towns, he says dishonest bakers were set in a tumbrel or stool and dipped in river water, not to drown them, but to wash shame into their bones. The pilgrim woman snorts and says she's heard that punishment belongs more often to scolding wives and dishonest brewers than bakers. The peddler shrugs, untroubled by accuracy. In his trade, a tale only needs enough truth to stand upright until the next village. The road passes a pond half-skinned with ice. Reeds bend at the edge. A heron lifts slowly, annoyed by humans and their legal histories. You imagine a baker in winter sputtering from a dunking stool, while townsfolk stand wrapped in cloaks pretending civic concern and secretly grateful not to be the one in the water. Medieval justice often seems to believe cold water improves character, which is convenient in a land with so much of it lying about. You walk on. By midday the clouds thin and a pale sun appears without warmth like a candle seen through linen. The mule cart stops near a roadside shrine where 3 tracks meet. There under a little wooden roof a carved saint holds a loaf in one hand and a bishop's staff in the other. Someone has hung a ring of plaited straw around his neck. Someone else has left a crust gone hard as horn. Some swear that travellers who touch the crust and make the sign of the cross will not be cheated at market. Even now it is hard to tell whether this protects the purse, the bread, or merely the mood. You touch the shrine because everyone else does, and because refusing a harmless custom on a lonely road seems like poor manners toward the unseen. The peddler tells another tale while the mule drinks from a ditch. In a city near the sea, he says bakers caught mixing poor meal with good were fined, and their loaves given to prisoners, lepers, or the poorest at the gate. A child once ate such a loaf, and dreamed of Saint Honoré, who pointed to the baker's oven where a hidden sack of spoiled grain was found. The pilgrim woman says saints do not usually work as market inspectors. The peddler says perhaps they should given the state of trade. One cart brother says he would rather be judged by a saint than by his wife, who has better memory and fewer feast days. The joke passes softly down the road, then fades. At a wayside fire by late afternoon you share a rest under leafless oaks. The brothers boil onions in a little pot. The pilgrim woman unwraps cheese wrapped in cloth. You contribute the last of your abbey bread. The peddler produces dried apples from a pouch with the air of a magician revealing treasure, though one apple slice has clearly met pocket lint and survived with dignity. Talk returns to punishment as hands warm over the flames. Some places favour fines, some favour shame, some seize the bread, some make the baker feed the poor at his own cost. Some say a cheating baker should have his oven door marked or his measure broken before the crowd, because a broken measure speaks more plainly than a sermon. Those who tell the tale never fully agree where custom ends and law begins. In truth, each town seems to stitch justice from whatever cloth it has. Hunger memory officials weather saints and the temper of the market. The dog receives a bit of cheese rind and accepts it as evidence that civilization has merits. As evening comes, the road darkens under trees. A distant abbey bell sounds somewhere beyond the fields, weaker than the one behind you, but steady enough to lead the mind toward shelter. You pull your cloak tighter. Around you, pilgrims and peddlers walk in a slow line through the blue-grey dusk, carrying tales of bakers, rivers, curses, fines, and holy warnings from village to village like coals kept alive beneath ash. The night road gives you a barn before it gives you a bed, which is generous by the standards of winter travel. You sleep beneath a sloped roof where hay lies damp at the edges and warm in the middle, where mice perform tiny business in the walls, and where the mule from the onion cart sighs in its dreams as if still disappointed by every hill it has ever climbed. The dog curls against your side, having decided that your cloak is common property. Before dawn, frost settles over everything. It whitens the yard, stiffens the rope by the well, and turns the cartwheels into dark circles rimmed with pale glass. When you step outside, your breath rises slowly in front of you. The world is quiet except for the crunch of boots, the creak of leather, and a far bell carried from some village hidden beyond the hedges. Morning has not yet warmed the fields, it has merely allowed them to be seen. You walk with the others across a land that looks emptied. The fields lie shorn and hard, their stubble silvered with frost. Crows pick among the furrows. Low stone walls divide one strip from another, and here and there a heap of manure steams faintly precious as treasure, because spring, if it ever remembers to come, will ask what winter saved. A man in a patched hood drives 2 thin oxen along a lane, their ribs showing under winter hide. He lifts one hand in greeting, then tucks it back under his cloak, as if even politeness costs heat. By mid-morning you reach a village gathered around a mill stream. It is smaller than the walled town, no gate, no guild hall, only cottages with smoke leaking through thatch, a little chapel, a smithy, a pond skinned with ice, and a mill whose wheel turns slowly in the cold water. The sound is steady and wooden, a deep paddling groan that seems older than speech. Grain sacks wait near the door marked with bits of coloured thread so families can know their own. A miller's boy stands with a tally stick cutting notches with a knife while his nose runs in the cold. Here bread feels different. In the town it was trade law price and public trust. Here it is the village's breathing. One oven serves many households. One mill grinds the winter store. One bad sack can pass into many loaves before anyone understands why bellies ache or why bread crumbles like old plaster. A bad loaf is never only a loaf when grain is scarce. It is a question asked by every cupboard and every child's empty bowl. You stand near the mill door, warming your hands under your arms. The peddler has gone ahead toward a larger road, but the pilgrim woman lingers leaning on her staff. The onion brothers unload one sack for grinding, arguing softly over whether the miller's share is too generous. The miller himself appears at the doorway broad as a barrel and dusted pale from brow to boot. Flour clings to his eyelashes, giving him the look of a man slowly becoming bread in self-defence. Some swear millers can steal by the sound of grain falling into the hopper, knowing exactly when to take a handful more than their due. Others say millers are accused because no one understands stone's water or why flour vanishes during grinding. No one can quite agree whether suspicion follows the miller because he cheats, or because he stands between hunger and bread with a locked door. Inside the mill is dim and full of motion. The upper stone turns over the lower with a heavy grinding whisper. Grain trickles from the hopper. Meal falls into a wooden bin in pale drifts. Dust floats in shafts of light coating beams, sacks' shoulders, and the sleeping cat curled near the wall. A small charm of iron hangs beside the door, shaped like a horseshoe meant to keep the grinding stones from cracking and to turn away envy. It may also be there because iron nails are useful, and someone had no better place to put it. Medieval protection often looks suspiciously like storage. A woman brings in a sack of mixed grain rye barley, a little oats, perhaps peas dried hard from autumn. She watches every motion of the miller's hands. Her face is narrow with winter. She tells you not because you ask, but because cold mornings encourage speech, that the family's wheat is gone, the rye must last until Lent and the oven day is tomorrow. If the meal is poor, the bread will be poor. If the bread is poor, the children will still eat it. That is the trouble with hunger. It does not wait politely for quality. At noon the village oven is fired. It stands in a low bakehouse near the green, built of clay stone and soot with a roof patched by reeds. Households bring their dough in bowls and baskets, each marked with a cross, a cut a twig or a scrap of cloth so the loaves may be known after baking. A widow presses 3 lines into hers with a comb. A boy pokes his family's dough too deeply and is swatted gently away by his grandmother. She mutters that dough dislikes being stared at by fools, which seems unfair to dough since it has no eyes and many responsibilities. The oven keeper feeds wood into the mouth until the chamber glows. Smoke rolls out thick and fragrant. Children gather near the warmth. Women talk in low voices about flour rents hens that have stopped laying, and whether dried nettles in pottage strengthen the blood. Some swear nettle tea keeps winter weakness from settling in the bones. Even now it is hard to tell whether it cures the body the fear or the simple longing for something green. When the embers are raked aside, the loaves go in. The long peel slides turns with drawers, one family's dough beside another's. richer and poorer, darker and lighter, all entrusted to the same heat. You understand then why a baker's care matters so much. An uneven oven can spoil not only one supper, but a village's hope. A careless measure, a smoky chamber, a handful of bad meal, a cracked brick where heat escapes. Each small fault travels outward, multiplying quietly through tables and stomachs. As afternoon fades, the loaves emerge. Some are good, some are heavy. One has split so wide it looks astonished by its own existence. Another is scorched along one side, and the owner clicks her tongue but says nothing because it is still food. Here punishment feels less like anger and more like fear given rules. Fines and shame are not only cruelty. They are the village saying that winter is too narrow for deceit. You leave as the first stars appear over the frost-bitten fields. Behind you, families carry bread home under cloths careful as if bearing sleeping infants. The mill wheel turns in the dark. The oven's last heat glows red behind its door. Ahead, the road bends back toward the town, and the dog trots beside you through the cold, while the far bell marks another hour saved from hunger. The road bends back toward the walled town under a sky of hard little stars, each one pale and distant above the black hedges. Frost has begun to gather again in the cart rut, silvering the edges of mud where your boots sink and lift with slow, tired patience. The dog trots at your side, quieter now, as if even his paws understand that night travel asks for respect. Somewhere behind you, the village oven fades into darkness. Somewhere ahead, the town's bells wait inside their tower, ready to divide the night into pieces for everyone too poor to own time. When the walls appear, they are only a darker line against dark fields. A watchfire burns above the gate, its smoke sliding sideways in the wind. The guard lets you in with a glance and a grunt, perhaps remembering you from yesterday, perhaps not caring as long as you're not an army. Inside the gate, the town is mostly asleep, though never silent. Water drips from eaves. A horse stamps in a stable. A baby frets behind a shutter, then hushes. A drunk somewhere explains an important matter to a barrel with great seriousness. You follow Ash Lane by smell before sight. Rye smoke, cooling brick, wet ash, and the faint sourness of dough resting for morning. The lane is narrow and nearly black. The upper stories lean overhead, shutting out most of the stars. A small lamp burns in Martin's bakehouse, and the glow under the door lies thin as spilled honey on the stones. You should pass by. A stranger with road mud on his heem has no official place in another man's sorrow. Yet the door to the yard stands half open, and from within comes the soft scrape of a shovel, then a woman's low voice, then the cough of someone who has breathed oven smoke too many years. Curiosity is a poor excuse, but medieval towns run on poorer ones, so you step lightly into the shadowed yard. The dog follows as if invited by law. There is no grandeur here, only work pressed into walls. A stack of split wood leans beneath a lean-to. Empty flour sacks hang from pegs. A tub catches rainwater from the roof. Near the bakehouse door, a cracked brick lies on the ground, blackened at one edge. You remember Martin speaking of the oven's damaged back, and the brick seems suddenly less like an excuse and more like a small hard fact cold under the moon. Inside the bakehouse is dim and hot. The oven mouth is closed, but heat still breathes through its stones. Soot-black rafters hold hooks, baskets dried herbs and a rope of onions. Flour dust softens every surface. A beeswax candle already burned halfway down stands in a clay holder beside a bowl of dough covered with cloth. The room smells of labour after judgment, of ash swept but not gone, of wet wool drying near fire of yeast, quietly continuing its stubborn life. Martin sits on a low stool near the hearth. His sleeves rolled, his forearms red from heat and cold. His wife stands at the table, smoothing yesterday's wax from her tablet, with the flat of a small bone tool so new marks may be made. The apprentice crouches near the oven with a bundle of rushes wiping the bricks where ash has gathered. None of them speaks at first. Their silence is not empty. It is full of sums. You linger near the door ready to apologize, but Martin looks up and only nods. Perhaps after standing in the square, a man becomes less startled by being observed. His wife notices the dog first. That creature again. The dog lowers himself with perfect innocence beside a sack of rye. He attended the court, Martin says, may as well attend the accounts. It is the first small humour you have heard from him, and it lands gently, not enough to heal anything, only enough to show that the house has not entirely lost its breath. His wife returns to the tablet. She counts quietly, fine owed bread replaced tooth drawer, promised wood needed mill debt, disputed flour remaining. Each mark pressed into wax seems deeper than the last. On the shelf above her, an iron key hangs from a nail beside a little cloth bundle tied with blue thread. Some swear blue thread keeps household envy from crossing the threshold, especially when business has been publicly shamed. No one can quite agree whether envy fears colour knots or the women who tie them. The apprentice lifts one hand to his cheek where a small burn has blistered near his jaw. Martin's wife sees it and reaches for a pot of salve. It smells of goose-fat honey and crushed comfrey. She dabs it carefully while the boy tries not to flinch. Some swear comfrey knits flesh as surely as a mason sets stone. Others warn it is too strong for wounds that run deep. Even now it is hard to tell whether the remedy works by herb faith or the comfort of being tended when one expects blame. The boy whispers that he should have turned the loaves sooner. Martin does not answer quickly. He looks toward the closed oven, toward the cracked brick, toward the sacks of meal that may or may not be fair, and at last says that a bad loaf seldom has one father. The phrase settles in the room. His wife stops marking the tablet. The candle leans in its own wax. You understand then that punishment has not ended in the square. It has followed them home, taken a seat by the hearth, and begun eating from the same bowl. It is in the apprentice's bent shoulders, in the wife's tightened mouth, in the way Martin studies his own hands as though they belong to someone whose judgment he no longer fully trusts. Public shame is brief for the crowd. For the household it lingers in every customer's future glance. Near the back wall, 2 children sleep under wool blankets on a raised pallet, their faces turned away from the light. One has a small wooden horse tucked beneath his arm. The other breathes through an open mouth, warm and soft amid the soot and worry. Their supper bowl sits empty near the hearth, scraped clean. Bread crumbs cling to it. Not fine bread, not festival bread. Just what the house has. Martin's wife covers the dough again and crosses herself over it, not grandly, almost secretly. She murmurs a prayer to Saint Honoré, then after a pause to Saint Martha, for household order, and perhaps to any listening power with patience for bakers. Those who tell the tale never fully agree which saint is best for a troubled oven. In houses like this, people ask several and hope none are offended. Outside, the town bell marks the late hour. Its sound reaches Ash Lane softened by roofs and mist, the same bell that watched the market, the court, the pillory, the almshouse, and now this dim room where work must begin again before dawn. Martin rises slowly and sets the cracked brick on the table. Tomorrow he says he will mend what can be mended. No one calls that forgiveness. No one calls it enough. But the candle burns lower, the dough rests beneath cloth the children sleep, and the dog, having found a fallen crumb near the sack, accepts it, with the grave dignity of a judge satisfied for the night. Before dawn, Ash Lane wakes before the rest of the town, and you wake with it not in a bed exactly, but on a bench near Martin's bakehouse door, wrapped in your cloak, with the dog pressed against your feet like a small snoring hearth. The candle has burned down to a shallow pool in its clay holder. The room is dark except for the red breathing of banked coals and the thin grey light gathering at the shutter cracks. Martin is already standing. He moves quietly for such a broad man lifting wood setting kindling, checking the patched place at the back of the oven where the cracked brick has been fitted, with clay and prayer. His wife kneads dough at the table, her sleeves tied back her hair covered in a linen coif. The apprentice works beside her slower than she does, glancing at Martin whenever the oven shifts or sighs. No one speaks much. Morning labour has its own language, the slap of dough, the scrape of ash, the creak of a bucket handle, the hush of flour scattered across boards. You wash your hands in water so cold it seems personally offended by skin. Martin's wife gives you a heel of yesterday's bread and a cup of small ale. It is plain, sour, and merciful. The dog receives nothing, then receives a crumb because his face suggests he is suffering a famine of attention. When the first bell rings, the loaves for restitution are ready to go. They are wrapped in clean linen and set in a basket. Not many, but enough to speak. Martin's wife marks each on her wax tablet one loaf, promised to the narrow woman for the bad crust and tooth one to the cooper, for short weight one to the servant girl's household for the failed trencher, 2 for alms and coin set aside for the fine. The coin lies in a little leather purse, and when Martin lifts it the sound is small. Too small for all the worry it has caused. Some swear that money paid before sunrise leaves the house with less bitterness than money paid after noon. No one can quite agree whether dawn softens debt or whether people simply prefer hardship while half asleep. You walk with them toward the Guildhall as the town brightens. The sky above the roofs is pale iron. Smoke rises in slow columns. A woman shakes old rushes from a doorway, sending dust and lavender stems into the gutter. At the well, 2 girls draw water and whisper when they see Martin. One looks away. The other stares, then blushes at being caught. Public shame, you realize, does not vanish when the wooden bar lifts. It becomes a second shadow walking beside a person even on ordinary stones. The broken cartwheel near the well has finally been removed, leaving a dark circle of mud where it stood. For some reason that absence makes the street feel changed. Even stubborn things are mended or carried away eventually. At the Guildhall candles are already lit. Their flames shine against the dim morning steady and yellow. The broad assayer stands near the table rubbing his hands together for warmth. The narrow assayer has the sealed weights laid out again, though there are fewer people present now. Judgment draws crowds. Restitution draws those who must live afterward. The reeve is there, and the clerk and 2 jurors, including the old man whose memory holds more quarrels than any ledger could survive. The monk from the abbey arrives last, hood damp with mist, carrying a small basket of his own. He nods to you then to Martin. The dog tries to enter behind him, and is permitted this time perhaps because even the porter is tired of enforcing laws against creatures who cannot read them. Martin places the basket on the table. The loaves are uncovered. They are darker than yesterday's best market bread, but they are full weight. The broad assayer checks them one by one, setting each against the iron standard. The beam dips, rises, steadies. No one speaks while it moves. In the quiet you hear the clerk's breath, the dog's claws shifting on the floor, and outside the muffled calls of early sellers. The assayer cuts one loaf open. Steam rises. The crumb is close but sound, and the smell is clean rye, sour leaven and wood smoke without bitterness. Martin's wife watches the knife, not Martin. The apprentice watches the assayer's face as if the man's eyebrows may decide his future. Better, says the broad assayer. It is not praise exactly. It is more useful than praise. The coin is counted next. Fine tooth drawer replacement. Each part is named and recorded. The narrow woman comes forward to receive what is owed. Her husband is not with her. which may mean the toothache's less or more, or that he prefers his justice delivered by his wife, who seems fully qualified. Martin gives her the loaf and the promised coin. She weighs both in her hands. For a moment nothing happens, then she says quietly, "See that it does not happen again." Martin bows his head. "I will." Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether such words mend trust or only begin the mending. Trust is not a cracked brick that can be set in clay by morning. It is more like leaven kept alive in a corner of the house, fed over time, ruined quickly if neglected. The cooper receives his loaf and nods without smiling. The servant girl takes bread for her mistress and hides a shy grin when the dog noses her basket. The monk accepts the alms loaves, lays his hand over them, and says a brief blessing so soft it seems meant more for the room than for heaven. Some swear that bread blessed after fault must be eaten before sunset, lest shame grow stale inside it. Even now it is hard to tell whether this is theology kitchen wisdom or a clever way to prevent waste. Then the apprentice is called forward, not to be punished but to be named in the record as bound again to proper watching of the oven, proper sweeping, proper turning, proper measure. His face reddens beneath flour dust. The old juror tells him that ovens are like old women and mules, they punish anyone who thinks he knows them too quickly. It is a strange piece of advice, but the hall accepts it as wisdom, perhaps because no one wishes to argue with old women, mules or ovens. Martin's future is not restored in a grand stroke. The reeve does not smile and declare all forgiven. The town does not embrace him with music and garlands, which is fortunate, because no one has garlands in February, and the musicians are probably still asleep. Instead, the record is marked. The fine is received. The restitution is witnessed. The warning remains. That is the shape of second chances here, not clean, not soft, but usable. You leave the Guildhall as morning opens fully over the market. A few buyers glance toward Martin's basket, then away, then back again. One woman asks when his next loaves will be sold. He answers after terce if the oven draws well. She nods, undecided but listening. His wife closes the empty purse and tucks the wax tablet beneath her cloak. The bell rings clear above the roofs. You stand for a moment in the square where yesterday the pillory held him, and today the stalls rise again, damp canvas fish smell cabbage leaves, coins, breath smoke and bread. The dog sits beside you, watching Martin walk toward Ash Lane, not free of what happened, but not finished by it either. Candlelight has given way to pale day, and the iron scales rest inside the hall, waiting as all measures do for the next human failing. The morning market grows around you with the patient stubbornness of moss on stone. Stalls rise, awnings sag, baskets fill, and voices begin their daily weaving onions, fish thread, salt, old iron, cheap knives, better knives, miraculous ointments that smell mostly of goose fat and confidence. The square seems almost the same as before, yet not quite. Nothing returns exactly as it was after public judgment. Even cobbles remember where people stood. You follow Martin at a distance as he and his wife go back toward Ash Lane. The dog follows closer because dogs are less troubled by reputation than by the possibility of bread. The apprentice walks behind them with the empty basket swinging from one hand. He looks lighter than he did in the hall, though not light. No one in this town becomes light before breakfast and work. At the bakehouse, the oven waits. It has cooled enough to be cleaned, not enough to be ignored. Martin rakes the ash slowly, drawing it forward with an iron tool while the apprentice holds a lamp. His wife sets fresh dough near the table covered with linen and opens the shutters to let in pale day. The room fills with the ordinary music of beginning again, wood-stacked flour, sifted cloth, shaken water, poured clay bowl, set down knife against board. There is no grand speech. There is only work, which in this world is the speech people trust most. You warm your hands near the oven stones. The repaired brick sits dark at the back, ugly but firm. Someone has pressed a small cross into the wet clay around it. Some swear marking an oven with a cross keeps the heat even and turns away spiteful eyes. No one can quite agree whether the cross helps the bread the baker or the people who must believe the next loaf will be better than the last. By midday the first new batch goes in. Martin waits longer before drawing the heat. The apprentice watches without blinking. His wife checks the weights twice, then a third time, not because the iron has changed, but because trust now has to be fed carefully like a weak fire. You notice her old blue thread charm still hanging above the shelf, and beside it a tiny pilgrim badge shaped like a loaf, dull and bent. Perhaps it is a keepsake from a shrine of Saint Honoré. Perhaps it is something a traveller once traded for supper. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether such objects are relics, charms, memories, or simply metal too sentimental to throw away. The loaves emerge in steady order. They are not beautiful in the way feast bread is beautiful. They are dark, round, practical, with cracked tops and heavy shoulders, but they smell clean. Their undersides are browned, not blackened. Their weight sits properly in the hand. Martin breaks one open, and steam lifts from the crumb into the dusty shaft of light crossing the bakehouse. No one cheers. Bread is not a tournament. His wife nods once. The apprentice exhales. The dog sits upright with the expression of a magistrate prepared to review evidence by mouth. Martin tears a thumb-sized piece from the end, cools it between his fingers, and gives it to the animal. The dog accepts chews and appears to find the town's legal recovery promising. Soon the loaves are carried back into the square. People see them coming, that is clear. The narrow woman is at the well drawing water. The cooper stands near a barrel talking with another man. The old juror leans against the market cross pretending not to watch, while watching with the full devotion of age. The monk from the abbey has returned with a basket for alms bread, and his sleeve still bears a dusting of yesterday's crumbs, as if mercy has flour on it. Martin sets out his bread. For a while no one steps forward. The market sounds move around this stillness. A hen clucks coins, clink. A mule sneezes a ribbon. Seller praises the redness of his thread as if red thread has solved more problems than kings. Then a woman you do not know buys the first loaf. She presses it, waits, it turns it over and pays. It is a small act, but small acts are the mortar of towns. The cooper buys next. He says nothing beyond the price. Martin says nothing beyond thanks. That's enough for now. The narrow woman does not buy. She stands with her water bucket and watches. Her husband's tooth, wherever it is aching in town, has not yet become generous. Yet when the monk takes 2 alms loaves, she does not object. You see her glance toward the almshouse lane, then away. Some soften slowly like beans in a winter pot, and only after much heat. The day passes. You move through it without hurry, resting at the well, warming yourself near the candlemaker's brazier, eating pottage from a wooden bowl, while seated on an overturned crate beside the square. The bread you are given is Martin's. You tear it and dip it into the broth. It holds. It softens without surrender. It tastes of rye smoke, sour leaven, and the faint sweetness that hunger finds in anything honest. Evening comes with blue shadows under the eaves. The market folds itself away. Fishboards are scrubbed. Unsold cabbages are packed into baskets. The toll clerk locks his iron box and carries it beneath his cloak. A boy gathers old rushes and straw from beneath the stalls. The pillory stands empty near the market cross, darkening in the dusk. It looks like plain wood again, though you know better now. You know how quickly plain wood can become memory-warning lore. The abbey bell sounds beyond the wall, answered by the church bell within the town. Their notes cross over roofs and lanes over Ash Lane, and the almshouse over the Guildhall, where iron scales rest in shadow over the manor hall with its smoky rafters and worn benches. The half-burned candle at the inn will be lit again from some new flame. The broken cartwheel has gone to be mended or burned. The suspicious monk carries bread through the damp toward those who need it. Martin's wife will mark the day in wax. The apprentice will sleep near flour bins and perhaps dream of oven heat. You sit by a small fire near the inn yard, wrapped in wool, the dog asleep against your leg. A last piece of bread rests in your hand. It is only bread, and it is everything: field, rain mill, measure oven, coin, hunger, fault, shame, mercy, and the chance to begin once more before dawn. The fire settles lower and the town settles with it. Above you the rafters hold their soot-dark silence, and the last smoke curls upward in a thin, gentle thread. The dog breathes slowly beside your boot. Somewhere behind the walls a baker covers tomorrow's dough with linen, a monk closes an oak door, and a clerk leaves his quill beside a dry page, trusting morning to bring enough ink for whatever human trouble waits. The bells grow softer now. They no longer call anyone to court, to market, or to judgment. They drift through the dark like warm metal remembered from far away. The lane outside lies quiet beneath mist. The well rope hangs still. The shrine candle trembles once, then steadies. In the bakehouse the repaired oven keeps a hidden warmth in its stones, not bright enough to light the room, only enough to promise that heat can remain after hardship has passed. You let the last crumbs fall from your fingers. The bread has done its work. The day has done its work. The old town, with all its mud-smoke, wool hunger, and watchful windows, begins to blur at the edges. Its laws fold into sleep. Its quarrels soften. Its footsteps fade down lanes of straw and stone. There is nothing more for you to carry tonight. The fine has been counted. The loaves have been weighed. The fire has been banked, and the road will wait until morning. For now you rest where the air is dim and warm, where the blanket holds close around your shoulders, where the medieval dark becomes gentle instead of cold. The last bell fades. The hearth glows. The dog sighs, and the world grows quiet enough for sleep.